Hey everyone, it's Vladimir and I'm a certified Scrum Master. If you're looking for an answer to the question, what is Scrum? You're in the right place. This video will be useful to anyone wanting to get a high-level understanding of what Scrum is, but more specifically, I believe people who are preparing for professional Scrum Master certification would benefit the most, because the knowledge you're about to gain here is aligned with the latest version of the Scrum Guide. Now, a quick personal story. When I was preparing for a professional Scrum Master level 1, just like you, I started watching YouTube videos, right? Explaining what Scrum is. The roles, events, artifacts. But the more videos I watched, the more confused I got because these videos were contradicting with each other. For example, how many people are in the development team? Who creates the definition of them? What is the duration of the Scrum events? These questions and many others were answered differently, but I'm here to tell you that this is not up to the Scrum practitioner to choose the answers to these questions. This is written in the Scrum Guide, and we have to adhere to the Scrum Guide if we want to apply Scrum in its entirety. This is why, when you download it, on the first page you will read the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game. I am excited about this video. I'm planning on creating more videos that prepare people for the PSM1 exam and also help them master the Scrum Framework. Okay, if this is something that you want, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a video. Alright, let's get started. What is Scrum? Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. Now, a few comments here. I want to bring your attention to the word framework. Scrum is a framework. It is not a methodology, process, or a method. If you have heard somewhere or watched a video that Scrum is a methodology, I would ask you to unlearn that and remember that Scrum is a framework. You might be thinking, Vladimir, what's the big deal here? A framework, a methodology, process, whatever. Well, the thing is that you might see a question on the Professional Scrum Master PSM1 exam asking about what Scrum is. The passing score there is very high, 85%, and this is such a simple question, it's just not worth it to lose points on it. Next, Scrum is based on empirical process control theory or empiricism. Yes, it sounds complex, but in reality it is not. Here is what the Scrum Guide says. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is known. Scrum employs an iterative, incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk. To make decisions based on what is known, we need transparency of the information. Transparency is a quality of the Scrum Artifacts, which are 3 by the way. The product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. But not only that, the fact that everyone in the team knows how the project advances, for example, this is also about transparency. Scrum relies on transparency, and this is why transparency is one of the pillars that uphold Scrum. The other 2 are inspection and adaptation. So 3 pillars uphold Scrum: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. You have to learn them by heart, but these pillars are connected, okay? So we need transparency to do inspection, and we need inspection to do adaptation. Next, the Scrum values. There are 5 values Scrum teams must respect and work by: commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect. Commitment. People commit to achieving the goals of the Scrum team. For example, the sprint goal. Courage. People dare to do the right thing and work on tough problems. Focus. People focus on the work of the sprint and the goals of the team. Openness. The Scrum team and its stakeholders agree to be open about all the work and the challenges with performing the work. Respect. People respect each other to be capable and independent. Once again, commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect. If you read Scrum books, if you watch other videos, the authors might be suggesting more Scrum values. Everything might sound logical, supported by examples, but please do not choose any other values on your PSM1 exam besides these 5. Next, the Scrum roles. There are 3 roles in Scrum: the Product Owner, the Scrum Master, and the Development Team. That's it. There are no team leaders, project managers, designers, testers, back-end developers or front-end developers, and so on. But please do not get me wrong here. There are members of the development team who specialize in design, testing, back-end development, architecture, and so on. I'm talking about the roles here. Once again, a designer is not a role in Scrum. We call that person a developer. Why is that? The Scrum Guide says, Scrum recognizes no title for development team members, regardless of the work being performed by the person. And Scrum recognizes no sub-teams in the development team, regardless of the domain that needs to be addressed, like testing, architecture, operations, or business analysis, and so on. Now let's start with the product owner. The product owner is responsible for maximizing the value of the product resulting from the work of the development team. The product owner owns the product backlog, which is one of the Scrum Artifacts, as I've already said. He is a business person and he is responsible for communicating with, and of course engaging and communicating with stakeholders. The product owner explains the PBIs, product backlog items, to the development team. Communication is critical here. Next, the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is responsible for promoting and supporting Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. The Scrum Master is also considered to be a servant leader. They serve the product owner, the development team, and the entire organization. The Scrum Master makes sure that everyone first understands and second applies the Scrum Framework in general in its practices, rules, and values. Another characteristic of the Scrum Master is that they remove impediments. And here I want to be more specific with you. What does that mean? What is an impediment? One definition that I like very much is this: an event that impedes any of the developers from working to their anticipated sprint capacity. To give you a quick example, the product owner does not communicate enough with the development team. This is a serious impediment. As I've said, the product owner explains the product backlog items, and this is something that definitely impedes the developers from working to their best capacity. Before I go to the next role, I want to make a quick note here. The Scrum Master is not a project manager. The role project manager does not exist in Scrum, and it does not have an equivalent role. Okay, project management activities are being distributed among all members of the Scrum team. Next, the development team. The development team consists of professionals who do the work of delivering a potentially releasable increment of done product at the end of each sprint. The key characteristics here are cross-functionality and self-organization. Cross-functionality refers to the fact that developers have all the skills as a team necessary to create the increment. Self-organization refers to the fact that developers choose how to best accomplish the work. Okay, no one tells the development team how to turn product backlog items into a potentially releasable increment. These two characteristics apply on 2 levels: the Scrum team as a whole and the development team. The size of the development team is from 3 to 9 people. Period. It is not 7 plus minus 2, it is not 5 plus something, no. 3 to 9 people. Having more than 9 people requires too much coordination. Having fewer than 3 people, we are running a risk of creating a team that is basically not cross-functional. Imagine 2 people do all the work: planning, designing, testing, coding, integrating, and so on. And again, I'm not saying that this is impossible. Some full-stack developers could do that, but hey, we're talking about the rules of the game here. So 3 to 9 people. The Scrum Master and the Product Owner are not included in that number, right? But you should also know that the Product Owner and the Scrum Master can be part of the development team. Scrum does not prohibit that, but it does not recommend it either. Why? Simple: conflict of interest. I would have to create specific videos for the Scrum roles, and we will be able to dive into their characteristics. Then it will be crystal clear to you why there would be a conflict of interest if, for example, the product owner is part of the development team. By the way, let me know in the comments, should I explain the product owner role next or maybe the Scrum Master? Please let me know. Next, the Scrum Events. We have 5 events in Scrum: Sprint Planning, the Sprint, Daily Scrum, Sprint Review, and Sprint Retrospective. Sprint Planning, this is where the team decides what to build during the sprint and how to build it. It is an 8-hour meeting for a 1-month sprint, and if the sprint is shorter, for example 2 weeks, the sprint planning meeting gets proportionally shorter as well. It becomes 4 hours. The sprint, as the Scrum Guide says, the heart of Scrum is a sprint. This is a container for all other events. The maximum duration is 1 month, but it can be 3 weeks, 2 weeks, or even 1 week. The Scrum Guide does not prohibit that, okay? But it is important to have a potentially releasable increment at the end of the sprint. Each sprint has a goal that guides the development team on what to build and also helps them stay focused. A sprint can also be cancelled, which is always bad for a team, by the way. It requires regrouping, it consumes resources, but here is the important part. Only the product owner has the authority to cancel a sprint. When do they do that? The answer is this: when the sprint goal becomes obsolete. Next, Daily Scrum. This is a daily 15-minute meeting for the development team. During that meeting, the development team plans the work for the next 24 hours. The duration of the meeting is always 15 minutes, no matter the length of the sprint. The Scrum Guide provides us with an example structure of the meeting. The developers should answer 3 questions. Here they are. What did they do yesterday that helped the development team meet the sprint goal? What will they do today to help the development team meet the sprint goal? And the last one is, do I see any impediment that prevents me or the team, the development team, from meeting the sprint goal? This structure is not mandatory. Some Scrum teams prefer an open discussion instead. Next, sprint review. A sprint review is held at the end of the sprint to inspect the increment and adapt the product backlog if needed. This is a critically important meeting because the Scrum team receives feedback from the stakeholders. Yes, the product owner invites key stakeholders to attend the meeting. Generally, the stakeholders can be 2 types, internal or external, and by the way, this is not written in the Scrum Guide. But I ask you to think about stakeholders as customers here for the purposes of this presentation. Scrum is an Agile framework. Being Agile means being adaptive. Adaptation is the key word here. To adapt, we need feedback. Do you start to see how powerful Scrum is? This feedback loop that's going on. Get the requirements, okay, and then build a small increment. Give the customer a chance to review and provide feedback. And then use that feedback to adapt so you know what to build in the next sprint. This allows us to build exactly what the customer wants, with very little to no deviation. Okay? The duration of the sprint review meeting is 4 hours for a 1-month sprint, and again, it gets proportionally shorter for shorter sprints. The last meeting the Scrum team does is called Sprint Retrospective. It happens after the sprint review and before sprint planning. This is a 3-hour meeting for a 1-month sprint, and as usual, the meeting is shorter for shorter sprints. Just like the other meetings, Sprint Retrospective is a formal opportunity to inspect and adapt, but this time not the increment. The Scrum team inspects itself and adapts the process they used to build the increment. Let me quote from the Scrum Guide. The purpose of the Sprint Retrospective is to inspect how the last sprint went with regards to people, relationships, process, and tools. Identify and order the major items that went well and potential improvements, and create a plan for implementing improvements to the way the Scrum team does its work. And finally, to ensure continuous improvement, we should include at least one high-priority process improvement to the next sprint backlog. We've come to the Scrum Artifacts: the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. Let's start with the product backlog. This is an ordered list of product backlog items It's everything we know that is needed in the product we are building. As I've mentioned, the product owner is responsible for the product backlog. He or she owns the product backlog. Usually, the items on the top of the product backlog are ready to be selected for development and are ordered by value. Most valuable items on top. The product backlog is never complete. It is considered to be a living artifact. Customer requirements are reflected in it. Next, the sprint backlog. During the sprint planning meeting, the development team decides how many items to move from the product backlog to the sprint backlog. Here, I want to point your attention to the fact that the product owner decides the order in which the product will be built, but the development team decides how many items to select for development. This is so because they do the work. They do the PBI estimates. They calculate their velocity. Next, the increment. The purpose of a sprint is to create a potentially releasable increment. Think of it as a version of the same product. So, increment number 4 includes all previous increments, number 3, number 2, and number 1. The product owner decides when to release the increment. This may be a few increments at a time then, no problem. It's not a rule to release an increment every sprint. Another important topic we should touch on is the definition of done. This is a must in Scrum. Okay, the definition of done increases transparency. Everyone in the team knows what it means an increment to be done. Think of it as a checklist. For example, the code is written in a standard format. The code is free of bugs. The code is reviewed. The code is tested and so on. I just want you to get an idea. This is not a complete checklist for sure. Now, who creates the definition of done? The development team does. Why? Because the definition of done is technical. If a definition of done exists on an organizational level, okay, the development team must follow it as a minimum. But if such a definition does not exist, the development team must craft one. This is a Scrum rule. Finally, the definition of done may change over time. As the Scrum team matures, as the Scrum team becomes more experienced, they might add more bullet points to the checklist and increase the quality of the work they do. I think it's critically important to understand that Scrum roles, events, artifacts are mandatory. We are not allowed to skip a meeting regardless of the reason. We are not allowed to have a Scrum team without a Scrum Master regardless of the reason. But if we do, the result is not Scrum. Now, let me focus your attention to one of the last sentences in the Scrum Guide. Scrum's roles, events, artifacts, and rules are immutable, and although implementing only parts of Scrum is possible, the result is not Scrum. Scrum exists only in its entirety and functions well as a container for other techniques, methodologies, and practices. And since we've learned all that, I want to go back to the sentence that I quoted at the beginning of the video. Scrum employs an iterative, incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk. This means that Scrum uses the Agile concepts iterative development and incremental development. Now, what do they mean? Incremental development refers to the fact that as a Scrum team, we are building the product incrementally, one increment at a time. This concept can be explained with a very simple sentence. Let's build some of it before we build all of it. Iterative development refers to the developing processes. Designing, coding, testing, integrating, and so on. In the waterfall approach or plan-driven development, these phases might last months. However, in the adaptive approach, Agile, in one sprint we go through all the phases so we can create a potentially releasable increment. I hope this makes sense. Now, if you're preparing for the Professional Scrum Master Level 1 exam or just want to master the Scrum Framework, be sure to check out my online course called Scrum Master Certification Training and PSM1 Sample Exams. Here you will find 3.5 hours of video content plus 160 high-quality sample exam questions. Go ahead to the first link in the description to learn more. If you have found this video helpful, please make sure to subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos helping you master the Scrum Framework. My name is Vladimir Raykov. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.